It's a dark night. Dark night.
Hi, Baldy Jack here, and today we're taking a look at the third installment in the Friday the 13th franchise. Whoa! Take it easy, Christian, you freaking party animal! Alright, let's take a look at Friday the 13th, Part 3, in 3D!
Friday the 13th Part 3 released August 13th, 1982, gaining praise for its 3D effects, goofy but fun characters, and what shaped Jason Voorhees out for iconic status. So without further ado, let's get started. The film opens moments after the events of Friday the 13th Part 2, with Jason removing the machete from his shoulder and wandering off into the night. Jason stumbles upon a little convenience store owned by a middle-aged couple named Harold and Edna. Harold, who is a diabetic, and Edna, well, is pretty much a bitch in layman terms. Jason lurks around for a bit, eventually stealing a pair of new clothes and setting up a jump scare for Harold. Just after Harold nearly shits himself, he receives a meat cleaver to the chest, followed by Edna getting jabbed in the back of the neck with one of her own knitting needles. We cut to the next morning where we're introduced to our main cast of characters, who are headed out to a lake house for the weekend. Chris Higgins is our main protagonist as she's returning to the lake house with her friends in a desperate attempt to rid some bad memories. There's Debbie and Andy, our sex-crazed couple in a sense, Shelley the gullible prankster, Vera the spunky teen that was set up on a blind date with Shelley, a laid-back stoner named Chuck, and his girlfriend, Chili. As the teenagers are on their way to the destination, and no, I'm not talking about Final Destination, they have a run-in with Discount Crazy Ralph. The guy speaks in gibberish and warns them to stay away from the area. He ends up showing the teens a human eyeball. As everyone shuffles back into the van in fear, they eventually arrive at Higgins Haven. While the rest of the group goes skinny dipping, Chris heads inside the cabin to check it out, only to find her boyfriend, Rick, inside, who has arrived way before them. Later on, Shelley pulls a practical joke that crosses the line, where he pretends to be murdered with a meat cleaver that's shoved into his forehead. This infuriates Chris and the rest of the group. Vera decides to borrow Rick's Volkswagen, stating that she needs to get out of here. Shelley pleads to tag along, but Vera reluctantly agrees. While they're at the store, Vera and Shelley have a run-in with a biker gang. Lesson learned, never toss your wallet, yet alone keep your precious condoms in there.
Well, they can't all be winners, can they?
As Shelley and Vera are about to leave, Shelley accidentally knocks down their bikes. Ollie happens to witness this, and in rage, he vandalizes Rick's car, punching in the windows with a chain and his bare fist. Shelley states to Vera that he went too far this time, and proceeds to run over the bikers' motorcycles in revenge. As they make their way back to the cabin, Rick is nearly shocked to see his car wrecked. Chris and Rick decide to go for a drive, allowing Rick to blow off some steam. Meanwhile, the biker gang shows up, plotting to siphon gas from the van and burn down the barn. Fox goes in and explores the barn. Eventually, she's killed off-screen with a pitchfork. Loco enters afterwards and is next to be killed by Jason, when he goes up to the loft of the barn to find Fox's impaled body. Jason punctures his midsection with a pitchfork, as Loco falls ever slowly to his demise. Ali heads into the barn, only to have Loco's body fall onto him. Ali attempts to fight Jason, but is presumably killed as Jason beats him repeatedly with a monkey wrench. Nighttime has fallen, and as Vera sits on the edge of the dock, a hand from underneath the water grabs her by the leg. But it only turns out to be another one of Shelley's elaborate pranks. Vera then questions why Shelley does the stupid things that he does. Shelley tries to explain himself that he just wants her to like him, but he sulks in shame and walks into the barn where he's murdered off-screen. Vera realizes that she still has Shelly's wallet and accidentally drops it into the lake. She enters the lake to retrieve it. Jason makes his way to the dock, now donning the Detroit Red Wings hockey mask. Vera thinks it's just another one of Shelly's unfunny pranks. Jason aims and fires the spear into her eye socket. It's an effective kill that I really do enjoy. We cut to Debbie and Andy, who just got done screwing around. Afterwards, Debbie takes a shower and Andy goes off to fetch a beer while performing a handstand. But he encounters Jason, who vertically swings a machete into Andy's crotch, slicing him in half. It's such a graphic kill that was shot beautifully. Debbie changes her wardrobe and rests in the hammock. Where she reads a Fangoria magazine, some blood starts to drip onto the magazine. Soon enough, she sees Andy's corpse hanging from the rafters. Jason drives a kitchen knife through her chest from underneath the hammock.
Alright, ladies and gentlemen, Christian Hanahar taking over here for the one and only Baldy Jack. So meanwhile, Chris and Rick are sitting around at a creek where Chris finally tells Rick her incident 2 years prior. She has an argument with her parents and she ran away from home to teach them a lesson. I mean, that makes perfect sense, right? We were all that age once. She later fell asleep under an old oak tree and then was awakened and attacked by a strange, deformed man with a knife. There's been some rumors roaming about that Jason raped her, but seriously, that's just ridiculous. But Steve Miner, what were you thinking even having this scene in this movie? I digress. Anyway, Rick tries to start the car, but the engine fails, thus forcing them to walk. Back at the cabin, Chuck and Chili are romancing it up when suddenly the lights go out. Well, typically the lights go out when you start romancing it up. Chuck heads to the basement to check the fuse box, but with Jason standing there waiting. Jason tosses Chuck up against the fuse box, electrocuting him to death. That was a great scene. Chili then finally finds Shelly agonizing with his throat slashed open, which probably a lot of characters in this movie wouldn't have been upset about that. At first she shrugs it off as one of his pranks, but soon finds it to be all too real and flees in terror. Only to run right into Jason, who kills her by impaling her with a well-heated fire poker in the stomach and out of the other end. Way to heat things up, Jason. Soon enough, Chris and Rick arrive at the Higgins Haven, finding it quite empty. Non-working lights and some burning popcorn, which is something Baldy Jack does all the time.
Popcorn? Is that your favorite?
As our remaining characters look puzzled, Rick searches around outside while Chris goes upstairs, and she finds a bathtub filled with water and blood-stained clothing. What is this, the end of It? Chris runs downstairs to look for Rick, unaware that Jason is holding him in silence. Jason grabs a hold of Rick's head and begins to crush it with his bare hands, basically to the point where one of Rick's eyeballs burst right out of the socket, a legendary scene. Chris wanders outside to look for Rick and finds Loco's mutilated corpse hanging from a tree. There's bodies everywhere in this movie. Terrified, Chris runs back inside, barricading the door and shutting the windows. Just then, Rick's corpse is thrown through the window as Jason enters the cabin, and I mean thrown through the window. Chris runs upstairs and knocks down an entire bookshelf onto Jason. That's one way to get him to learn how to read.
Jason, How you doing, Jason? You doing good? Chick, chick, ha, ha.
Chris hides inside a linen closet where she finds Debbie's corpse. Jason begins to hack his way into the door. Chris manages to pull out the kitchen knife from Debbie's corpse to wound Jason's left hand and right knee. Chris then grabs a chair, smashing a second-story window to escape. Jason heads outside after Chris, only to be struck in the back of the head with a wooden log. As Chris gets into the van and drives off, the vehicle stalls on the bridge due to the bikers siphoning the gas earlier in the film. Crime does not pay. Chris activates the reserve fuel tank and starts up the engine, but the wood of the bridge starts sinking the van in. Jason pops up and grabs her through the van window, but she closes the glass windows on his arm, forcing him to shatter the window with his mask. Chris runs off, but with Jason following in pursuit. Shortly afterwards, she reaches the barn where the cat and mouse game continues, just like Tom and Jerry. As Chris hides on the rafters, Jason barricades the door shut and then starts to search for her very angrily, tossing and throwing items around in the barn. Somebody's got to pick that up, Jason. When Jason looks upwards and sees Chris, she drops down on him, knocking him down for just a moment. She climbs up to the loft with Jason trailing behind. Unbeknownst to Jason, he gets smacked upside the head with a shovel, knocking him unconscious. She then wraps a noose around his neck and hangs him from the barn. A very surreal scene. As Chris opens the barn doors to reveal the killer hanging like a rag doll. To her surprise, though, Jason reveals his deformed face, only to recognize Jason as the madman who attacked her 2 years prior. Jason advances toward Chris and raises his machete, but Ali appears and has a tussle with Jason. Where has he been this whole time? Of course, Jason gains the upper hand, chopping Ali's arm off and slashing him multiple times. While Jason is busy swinging away, Chris picks up a nearby one-sided axe and sneaks up behind Jason as she plants the axe into his forehead. Heck, Jason still moves forward trying to grab at Chris, but shortly collapses. Chris stumbles down to the lake and rows away in a canoe. We cut to the next morning where Chris witnesses an unmasked and bloody Jason snarl at her through the cabin windows and then barge out of the door running towards her. My favorite scene in the movie. After frantically trying to push some tree branches, Chris looks up to see that the cabin door is intact and Jason is nowhere to be seen. Was all this just a hallucination? But in an unexpected turn of events, a grotesque Pamela Voorhees springs out of the lake, pulling Chris underwater. Another amazing moment. Moments after Chris wakes up, realizing that it was all just a nightmare. But not on Elm Street. A police officer escorts the traumatized Chris out of the cabin and into the police car, as she screams and laughs hysterically. It's clear that these events will scar her for the rest of her life. The film closes with one shot of Jason laying on the ground, and a few trickles of water on Crystal Lake.
In conclusion, Friday the 13th Part 3 is an eye-popping experience. It's a very enjoyable movie, and nothing can deny that. Obviously, the main selling point of the sequel was the 3D aspect, but there's something about this flick that gives it a certain charm, and I don't know how to describe it other than that. As far as the acting goes, it's serviceable. Granted, it could feel a bit scripted and not completely fleshed out like this very video you're watching. The characters are definitely one-dimensional and quirky at times, but hey, this is a Friday film after all.
Just relax. Be yourself.
Would you be yourself if you look like this?
The kills this time around are just fascinating. While there is a decent amount of gore, I absolutely love how they incorporate the 3D effect to quite a few of the kills. My favorite death without a doubt is Vera's demise, as it's such an iconic moment. As for the design of Jason Voorhees himself, it's a classic look. He dons a new attire, that being an olive green work shirt and gray slacks. Of course, I won't forget to mention the infamous hockey mask. Richard Brooke represents a sinister portrayal as the character, as he has a watchful eye on his subjected victims, and for him, it's nothing but a will to kill and nothing more. The film will go on to gross $36.7 million, making it the fourth highest box office in the franchise. Overall, if you're looking for a popcorn fun kind of horror film, sit down and watch Friday the 13th Part 3. And with that, I'd like to thank you all for watching, and until then, see you all next time.